were able to correct that in time. And so I think Mark have done pretty much of who I am. I'm the postdoc and affiliated to the institutions that he has mentioned, SPARC, Carlton, and MITAX, and currently based in Kenya. And my postdoc work research would have been carried, or rather, would going to be carried out in Kenya, western part of Kenya, and eastern Uganda, focusing on the pastoralists, on conflicts issues and cross-border movements, both internally within the country and across the border between Kenya and Uganda. And so that what we'll be focusing on going forward. And what I'm going to present today is a precursor of the larger project that I'm going to that I've begun to undertake actually. So it's just like a background scoping exercise and literature review on issues around conflicts, cross-border conflicts, cross-border movements of livestock, and the drivers of such conflicts around cattle movement, and how the trend have been, from the past to the current, even as I position myself to look into the future, how it will be in the next few probably years going forward. Thank you. So I hope you'll enjoy my presentation. So if I go straight ahead and share my screen. Okay. Just a minute.
Do you have the share screen option at the bottom there, Daniel?
Yes, I do.
You do, okay, great.
Yeah, so to get my let's see. Trying to familiarize myself. So when I go to the share, okay, I think I got it. Everybody can see that?
Yeah, it's all good.
Okay, great. Yeah, so so as I have said, trying to this particular study tried to look at the past and present trends of cattle theft and conflicts among the pastoral communities in Western Kenya and Eastern Uganda, as a precursor to my postdoc research, which is going to be looking at the try to deploy some sort of technology to better understand these conflicts because they have been mutating and metamorphing over time for various reasons, various drivers, and it's becoming more complicated and sophisticated, as we are going to see. It's actually taken a technological term, if we can use that term. And so I thought maybe I can also at some point use some form of technology to better understand it, and maybe going forward it may be useful in informing the policy being undertaken in the region, at the national level, even more devolved units like county governments in the case of Kenya, and also at the regional level, bodies that are proactively involved in curbing this problem that's so common in pastoral areas. In the northern region of Kenya, actually the whole Horn of Africa, as we know, we have interacted with these various presentations, more or less similar to this, with the SPARC team members. I know this is not very new to all of us. Okay. So down, I'll be looking at this particular presentation is going to cover the research areas that I was looking into and the methodology that I have used. And I'll be able to share some research findings and key messages that came out of this, and how this is linked or could be linked to practice and policy at different levels in the region. And I would just want to quickly say that I just did a brief scoping, in the field of about 10 days or so, but mainly on the side of Kenya. I didn't get into the Ugandan side, but I relied so much on the literature and sometimes telephone conversation with the networks across the border, also to get more on the other side. So I had more presence on the Kenyan side for the 10 days that I've been out there. And the areas that I've said is the Turkana County mainly, that's on the Kenyan side, more of the northwest side of Kenya, and the West Pokot. And then the Karamoja, more closer to the Karamoja Triangle, Lokori area, but that's only on literature review. So it's about this corner here. I borrowed this map from Rogei in 2018. It's this triangle here between the three counties. I mean, the two counties of Turkana County and Pokot County, and the other side of Uganda. So it's actually this area around here, because it's an interesting episode of cross-border movements between the two counties and across into Uganda, either from Turkana and Pokot area. And all these movements have various and varied dynamics. But just very quickly, yeah, as I said earlier, the methodology that I've used here is the taking of desktop studies and literature review on what has been happening in the recent past. But I also get an opportunity to talk more in depth when I was in the field, talk more in depth with key informants, such as government officials. This is both the national level government and the county level government officials out there in the field in both counties, and a number of international organizations and local NGOs and community-based organizations. I met a number of leaders in both counties. And also I had an opportunity to talk to traditional and religious and opinion leaders in the both counties. And I had also had a chance to have, sampled randomly interviews from, people and in the marketplace and herdsmen not far from towns. I was not getting far away into the hinterland, but I was working around the towns area. And I also got an opportunity to participate in various meetings, one of them being held by IGAD and another one at the county level in Pokot. And I gained some insight that further enriched this study. So if I may dive into the research findings very quickly, is that traditionally, what could be called the past, it's not easy to delineate the timing of how past is past, but I would say maybe in a decade or so and beyond, there have been always reasons just to justify these conflicts and cattle theft between the communities. And one of them is the cultural rites of passage, the warriorhood, the marriage, you need to pay the bride price and all that. And this has always triggered, the stealing of cows from one community, and the other one always, kind of go back and do the same to the other. But also there have also been a conflict over natural resources, especially grazing areas and water points, more so in times of droughts and famine. And so this is common, like if it has rained in one end, across the border, the other community will move with their herd into that region, and a conflict will ensue, which will actually be the stealing of cattle. It takes many shapes and forms, but it also includes the stealing and confiscation of livestock. And then the cyclic revenge, going back to do what they did in the past, and this has been going on and on for generations. And it's like a vicious cycle of conflicts that none of the communities would want to be like the last one to have been invaded without revenging back at some point. And in the contemporary times, the trends and drivers seems to have to be shifting slightly, although they are still, still common around resource conflicts. And it has also come out that in the last like a decade or so, the droughts have become more frequent, and so the conflict over water and pasture. Also, this is coupled also with the increase in population of the people, increase in the population of the livestock. And so there has been an emerging trend of kind of a territorial expansion, both for grazing, but for another new emerging issue also is for speculation for resources, speculation for what I would call commercially viable resources. For example, the oil in Lokicha, in Turkana. There is also the prospects for geothermal, also still around Turkana region. And so there are these, the new, what I would call the mega projects that are coming up. And it looks like it's going to intensify because there's a lot of opening for development projects in the region. And so like the tarmacking of roads, and we have the LAPSET that is coming up on the northern side of Kenya. And so because of these speculations and prospects, some counties, and particularly the communities, are going for beyond what used to be their traditional boundaries, like claiming that this is our land because there's speculation for a particular resource, a particular opportunity that's coming up. And then another new dimension to the conflict is the commercial and trade itself around the livestock. Initially, it was just traditional, going from one community to another and keeping of the livestock within the homesteads. But over time now, these livestock are finding their way into the markets. And there come in the use of technology in form of mobile telephony. Because of the availability of network coverage in the region, people would collude and to even go to an extent of sending photos via maybe WhatsApp of a particular kind of cow or donkey or camel or whatever it is to the prospective buyers. And so there's now that alliance going on actually beyond ethnic boundaries. So it looks like it's a collusion, another very interesting area that this study will look into more deeply going forward, of how now it ceases to be one community versus the other, but there's a new alliance and coalition building up across the boundaries. And these have been motivated by the coming up of industries. For example, there is a donkey abattoir by a Chinese company, and donkeys in the past have not been known to be so much slaughtered in the region, but this is now a new market for donkey meat. And this has escalated the animal theft. And then another new dimension of drive of this conflict is politically motivated. In some areas, I found out that the politicians would make inflammatory statements, especially in times around political periods like now, because we have an election coming up actually in August, and the political tension in the country is high. And it's around this time that politicians will incite some sections of the community against the other. And normally the approach to take is confiscation of livestock, or rather stealing of livestock, and displaces given particular section of the community. But culture is still there. For the rite of passages, it still persists. But the only difference now compared to the recent past is that lately the bride wealth has really gone up, sometimes up to 100 cows and all that. So it really makes it very different. It's even much more when a particular bride is educated, because the parents feel like, I've invested in my daughter, and so you have to pay a higher bride price, which pushes the young man to go overboard and steal the livestock from across the border. And but there could be more to that as to the reason why the bride wealth is going up, but that's maybe subject to a subject for further investigation going forward in this study. And there was a case that I came across while I was actually there in Pokot, and my informants whom I was talking with just informed me that there was an incident across the border where the Pokot stole some cattle from the Karamoja community, and 2 Ugandan soldiers were killed, by the Pokot warriors, and in turn 3 of them were injured, but then were brought in to be to a hospital in Kenya. It is important to know that actually the Kenyan Pokot, okay, first of all, the Pokot and the Turkana resides in both sides of the border. But I think there is more Pokot, more formally settled in Uganda than the case of Turkana. And so sometimes it complicates things because the Pokot community are on both sides. And so sometimes those who are, and also it's very difficult to know their nationalities. Like both of them, they have like dual nationalities. They have the identities for Uganda and the identity for Kenya. And they would, this means that they would conceal or they would hide the raiders, and makes it difficult for the soldiers or the law enforcers to be able to recover them. And the implication of this is that this has the potential of straining diplomatic relations between the 2 countries when when trying to come up with protocols and treaties becomes difficult to enforce them because of such issues. But you also admire that whether that is informed by this or something else, there's been a slow response by law enforcers whenever there is such a conflict because of the difficult terrain that was I gathered. And also it looks sometimes the raiders actually are more equipped, more armed than the law enforcers, the police in this case. So this makes it difficult for them to rapidly respond to the conflict. It also emerged that it seems the Pokots have more cows than the Turkanas, and on the other side, there are more camels. I mean, the Turkanas who possess more camels and shorts at sheep and goats. I'll be able to investigate more on that, whether it is territorial reasons, geographical reasons, or there's any other reasons why the Turkana prefers to keep more camel and goats, while the Pokots have more cows. But then, as I said, there are more of Pokot cows in Uganda because of they are being hosted by their kings in Amudati district. But they would actually normally forage deep into Uganda region. It emerged that there is more commercialized theft. It's more pronounced in Lale and Lema sub-county in Turkana, and this targets more of sheep and goats and camel. And for some reason, the price of a camel in Uganda is almost double that on the Kenyan side, and so this creates, like a demand force, and actually the same on the other side, where it ends to in Uganda, and why there is a much better price for camel in Uganda is something that that will be interesting to find out going forward. But it's also interesting to know that the COVID-19 have also contributed in a way, as a major driver to these conflicts and cattle theft, because during the lockdown, there has been a breakdown of traditional, connectors or traditional systems of trying to manage these conflicts. And so it has been difficult to enforce such peace accords and festivals targeting the communities in that region that always aim to bond and unite these communities. So in a way, COVID-19 has an implication and a bearing to more conflicts. I'm sure there is more also to that and COVID-19 will also be a good entry point for my investigations going forward in the subsequent stages of my study. And linking it to the policy, I was looking at this at the 3 different levels. At the county level, because on the Kenyan side, the counties have taken a more of a autonomous role of addressing issues that are unique and peculiar to them. And in that region, there's the North Rift Economic Bloc comprising of 6 counties where Turkana and West Pokot are part of it, and also Frontier Counties Development Council, where it comprises of 10 counties, a more broader region in the northern and northwest, northeastern region. And West Pokot and Turkana are still part of this. And they are coming up with an array of policies trying to address the issues of cattle rustling or cattle theft and conflict in the region. And so the findings of such studies as this would go a very long way in informing such policies at their formative stages as they are currently being developed. At the national level, I think the major policy that's applicable is the land policy. Because there have been a problem with the inter-county boundaries, the conflicts have been around the boundaries, with each community saying that our boundary reaches here. And as I said, because of the prospects of resources in the region, then there's bound to be more conflict around the boundary areas. So the national land policy, as it is currently, need to address that. And the land tenure system, you'll find that in some areas like the southern central Pokot is privatized, and it's more of agro-pastoral land use in nature, while Pokot North is communal. And this curtails movement and exacerbate more tension because of the movement of livestock back and forth. And the agro-pastoral people, those who have not actually moved their livestock, sometimes are hit or they are being fought because of what their kins have done far afield, And so there's been a lot of tension around that difference of land tenure system. But the most interesting also thing is how this is going forward, how this is going to inform land security in the future, considering that also around the land tenure issues, there's vulnerability for loss of land, vulnerability to climate change, if movements are curtailed and all that. There's also a framework for livestock identification traceability system being undertaken by Kenya Veterinary Association, trying to digitalize or apply the technology in the identification and traceability of livestock. So this is still at the cabinet level. It has not yet been adopted, but if it's going to be adopted, then it's going to be very useful in especially in my study, where I intend to deploy some form of technology to be able to monitor the movement of livestock or to understand the movement of livestock in the region, because it will give an anchorage to what for such innovations as mine and as others, because it has been experimented in some places. It has got some challenges that it faced, and this will go a long way to ease those challenges. And then there are other initiatives like the National Drought Contingency Funds, which is a bill also pending in Kenya that is supposed to cushion the pastoral communities from climate change and perhaps reduce conflicts in the region. But also in Uganda, there have been, these are more of community-driven and development organizations, NGOs, and all that, trying to come up with these treaties between communities, like the Nabila Tuk resolution of 2016 between the Pokot and Karamoja in Uganda. But the interesting thing is, besides this and many others, there's, it would work for a time, but then it collapse at some point. And why such resolutions and agreements don't last is an area of investigation going forward. as I conclude, at the regional level, IGAD is coming up with or rather, it has developed a transhumance protocol, which is mapping out the rules for mobility across borders. And this will feed into the African Union International Bureau for Animal Resource Initiative. And this seek to identify the specific areas and secure those areas where normally the routes that livestock use when migrating during drought period, across the counties and also across the international borders in the region. And so this is an important protocol, and the findings of such researches and others would help really strengthen it. The Mifugo protocol was adopted sometimes back in 2007 in Burundi, and was this in the region it's a collaboration between the law enforcers, the policemen across the region to be able to curb the livestock theft across the boundaries. And then there's an array of other, agreements, one between Uhuru and Museveni, that is in Kenya's and Uganda's president on cross-border integrated program. And this also is going to help in reducing tensions by undertaking certain developments like water projects, like schools, social amenities, hospitals, all that in that region, and possibly it aims to reduce conflict in the area in as far as livestock theft is concerned. And then, of course, the East African livestock bill is the latest, still pending at the East African Parliament in Arusha, Tanzania. And if this comes also in force, it is going to strengthen the rest of the agreement. So the question will be, one, how, and that's what I'll be looking going forward, is how all these agreements and protocols and legal frameworks speak to each other or contradict one another. And number two, why those which have been adopted for even as far as 2007 have failed, to work in one way or another, because we have seen that these conflicts still persist. And then lastly, on the final steps is about, as I have mentioned, is continue doing more in-depth studies on this, on the issue of digital theft and collaboration of young people across ethnic divides in informing each other to steal their livestock. But then, of course, also on my application of the technology to try to address or strengthen the livestock identification and traceability system to see if we are able to succeed where the previous applications have failed. Like, for example, the Bolas was modeled in somewhere in West Pokot, but it didn't work out for a number of reasons. And then, of course, the land policy is need to look into that to see how the land policy can be able to correct the errors of boundary making during the colonial time and address the current territorial expansion. Further investigate how they and why alliances are built and or broken between the warring communities, and then also look into the multiple and overlapping drivers of cattle theft and conflict in the region, because as we have looked in my presentation, there is quite a number of conflicts. There are a number of overlaps and multiplicity in terms of the factors that are driving cattle theft and conflict in the region. So, sorry, I've taken quite a time. Okay, so and that's the end of it. And thank you so much for listening. I look forward to your reactions because this is work in progress, and your ideas and reactions and comments will strengthen my work going forward. Thank you.
That's great, Daniel. Thanks so much. One thing I really appreciate about your presentation is that a lot of the work that SPARC is doing, and this is fine and good, a lot of the work is quite high level, sort of looking into various donor, funder, national, regional policies. And I think what you've offered us is a very sort of detailed insight into one specific geographic location. And I think that's a really terrific compliment. And I want us to be doing more of that as well. I know that a number of the research initiatives we have ongoing are getting into this level of detail and depth, but my good, like some of the observations and things that you've identified in your initial study I found most interesting. I'd like to put it out there for questions. We do have 20 minutes remaining or so. So please just signal to me if you'd like to. We're not a big group, so please signal to me if you'd like to ask a question. Deborah, I see you've appeared. And then there's the hand. Go ahead, please.
Hi, Daniel. Nice to meet you, and thank you for your presentation. I'm speaking to you from Kenya as well, and I'm coordinating SPARC communications at the moment. In your slide 11, you pointed out a number of the regional and national policy options for the dissemination of your work. And I really like that you're very specific about that. They included the IGAD and Mufugu Protocol, amongst others. And I wonder if you could clarify what channels of engagement there are for the dissemination of your work currently employed, and what could be further utilized, because your research is obviously key and invaluable and needs to go beyond the research arena. You're on mute, Daniel. Oh.
Yeah. Okay, all right. Thank you very much, Deborah. The channels of communication in disseminating my work, especially to inform these specific, policy frameworks and protocols in the region. I think it will so much take the collaborative effort and the existence of SPARC partners, especially ILRI, in the region, because I know ILRI as an institution is able to get through into these networks in the region, even government bodies. We are talking of East African community, we are talking of IGAD in one way or another. I think it can be one of the good channels to use to be able to disseminate the work and inform some of the work in progress. So I would identify it as a good ally in the region, so to speak, to use and be able to link up with the other regions. Number two is at the local level, especially the county level, I call it local, I mean county. It is in the county level because it is easier to get through into the county departments. They are more accessible, they are locally present in the region, and so it is easy to use the established systems at the county level. And also the particular organization, community-based organizations working in specific areas. Like, for example, I've identified a number of organizations both in West Pokot and in Turkana, and that was part of the objectives of my scoping exercise going out to the field, is try to identify these institutions. And they are very dynamic and active pastoralist organizations led by pastoralists themselves, and they have a lot of connection and networks. Actually, while I was in Turkana, I coincidentally found myself into a workshop on transhumance protocol by IGAD, and so I participated for a day and invited, so I just crashed into it. And so and they are open, they have an open-end policy, and I could be able to contribute. So using the local organizations, I could also be able to link up with these institutions in the region.
Okay, thanks very much. That's helpful. Can you just clarify me that you are associated with ILRI purely? So am I correct in that? when you say that you foresee using ILRI as a channel of dissemination?
Yeah, ILRI, because by virtue of being one of the SPARC, organization, and being based in Kenya, and I've already had meetings with them, one meeting actually with them, and so yeah, so by that virtue, I feel I'm more associated with them.
Okay, all right, thank you. That's helpful. So it sounds as though moving forward, it would be good for us to get to discuss how we can support dissemination of this research.
Okay. Thank you.
Shall we do that?
Sure.
Okay. All right.
That'll be good.
Good.
That'll
Thanks.
be good. I appreciate it. Yeah.
Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Deborah. Yeah, definitely. Getting this research, getting some more light on this research at a wider range through SPARC channels makes a lot of sense. Are there other questions? I see Nathaniel, please go ahead, Nate.
Sure, thanks a lot. And thanks for your presentation, Daniel. I saw on slide 7 you were talking about the drivers of conflict. And I was wondering if you could say a few words about sort of the relative magnitude of these different drivers, number one. And then the second one is I didn't quite understand, I think it was the second factor, the commercial factor. You mentioned how people are using mobile phones to sort of connect with different commercial partners. And then this was increasing conflict. So is this that because people are now migrating outside of, they're like traveling to markets they didn't travel to before? I was just wondering, I didn't quite understand it. If you could say a couple more words about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathaniel. Oh yeah, on your first question, you mean like classifying the drivers on the extent of their magnitude, or which one?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about which ones are, as we think about conflict in these areas. I understand they're certainly overlapping, but is it the case, for example, that resources are more important, or is it, we definitely hear stories that now that the elections are coming up, and with devolution, that politics start to play a larger role in these conflicts than they used to. I don't know if that was something that you experienced. We also at ILRI, we have projects that are thinking about the importance of resource scarcity as a driver of conflict. And I think that the literature is somewhat mixed on this, this idea that droughts might drive conflict, or if really, as we hear about in West Africa, that conflict is often just driven by politics or warlords effectively.
Yeah, that's something I will try to do going forward, like look into try to establish which are the more prominent drivers over the others. But I think it depends with the times and seasons and place. At a certain given season, you will find that maybe during a drought season, there's more conflict around resource use. And also maybe when we look at the political factors, they are more pronounced during electioneering periods like we are currently in. And actually in some areas, it's not in this particular 2 counties of West Pokot and Turkana, but in another counties actually close to that, Baringo and Samburu, counties bordering West Pokot, and also West Pokot in one way or another is also affected. A lot is happening currently as we speak, and there's a lot of displacements of the communities, and there are a lot of suspicion that this is happening because of more of political reasons than anything. Of course, there's now a lot of drought there, but there's that overlap of whether it is the drought is more prominent or it's a major cause or the political, because both are there in this particular season. So I think, yeah, going forward, that's something that we'll try to look into, try to see which one is more of higher magnitude than the other. And then the commercial factor, what I meant is that there's now the financial reason, there's now the more reasons of stealing cows than it was before traditionally, because of the new markets that are opening up, the means communication. When I talk of the telephones, it becomes easy for people to collude, those who are on the market end and those who are actually doing the actual stealing on the ground to communicate. So it is the process and motivates those who are going to steal for the sake of for commercial reasons, you know. And so that in that way, the commercial factor seems to be taking precedent. I mean, it's now a statement like taking the center stage more or less like the others, but it's actually something that's really coming up in the recent past. And just like on the others, I will also be looking into it more deeply to try and understand why in some regions it's more prominent, it's more pronounced in some areas than in others. Thank you.
It's a great question. Thanks, Daniel. I'm looking at the chat box. Chloe, I'm not sure if you'd like to elaborate. You sort of asked two really good questions there, which I think, and I had a similar one around the technology piece on the second. So perhaps you could just articulate those for the wider group, and Daniel can take a stab at answering them.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for the presentation, Daniel. Great to see you again. And nice that you got to spend some 10 days recently in Pokot and Takana. It was interesting to see what was coming out of that. So I had, for those people I don't know, I work on SPARC's innovation components, and I had two sort of comments related to innovation. One was around the role of customary institutions. So Daniel, you mentioned that there was some interesting examples from your visit of how customary institutions, customary cultural activities that are usually arranged to promote peace, intercommunal peace, was not possible during the lockdown. And I imagine that's because of the closure of Kenya County borders, which are the first time that devolution process has been used to isolate more in the country. So I was just curious, and if it would make sense to dig much more deeply into that and see what sort of recommendations could come out for development partners who are designing projects around peace building, and very specific recommendations in the case of Kenya and cross-border Kenya-Uganda. How could those customary institutions be further engaged to strengthen peace building? Because so much of the conversation shifted away from customary institutions as we are focused more on formal government devolution. And I think that piece of the puzzle and the importance of their role is lost. And some people assume they are no longer active, but here you have a very recent, very practical example of what they usually do, what was missing now in 2021, 2022, and probably some very helpful recommendations for policymakers going forward. So that was the first comment. And then the second comment was, I know, Daniel, we talked about this at length at all. So spare me as I just sort of briefly brief the others. But there's been a lot of technology for livestock tracking piloted and attempts to have it adopted in the region. And the constraint is really not around the technology solutions. It's all around adoption and ownership and political buy-in for the use of traceability, whether it's for livestock health, which has its own political economy challenges with that, or for conflict and peace building. And so I would just focus on the research as much as possible on cracking that, rather than too much investigation or due diligence on specific technology solutions, which we know a lot more about and are much less of the constraint in making a system work. So yeah, those are my two comments.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Chloe. The role of customary institutions. Yeah, I think that they play a very significant role in West Pokot. I met the representatives of the Council of Elders, and actually the role that they play on both sides, because as I said, there are Pokots on the Ugandan side, on the Kenyan side, so they play a very significant role. It looks like the government, or rather the law enforcers, like using that institution because it's complicated when the people are on both sides of the border, the same people, the same culture, it becomes very difficult for them to be able to identify who was involved in cattle theft. And so they play a very big role. And especially working with the government and the government authorities and the government body departments. Perhaps what I would like to look deeply into is the development partners, the extent to which development partners use these traditional institutions, because I know the international, especially the international development organizations, would love to use or prefer to use the local community-based organizations ran by some, local elites, and in one way or another, most of the time, the traditional leadership is not so much involved because for some reasons that I'll probably look into, but I think what I can pick off my head is that maybe they are considered, these development processes are considered to be a little bit technical and difficult to involve for the traditional leaders and all that. But that's a very interesting point and a very good comment that I will be able to pursue going forward. And then on the technology versus political economy and the political goodwill, I saw an opportunity with the county governments because they are unlike the national governments, which are a little more detached from these remote, marginalized areas. The county governments are seeing this as well marginal frontiers as potentially very good areas and resource-rich areas in terms of advancing the economic agenda. And I have said, as I had mentioned earlier, about the economic bloc, the council of the 10 frontier counties. So they are very keen on developing the economies around their natural resources in their territories. And for this to happen, they really have to address the issue of insecurity and the issue of conflict. And they are very keen to take into consideration. I think there's some degree of political goodwill at the local level, I mean at the county level, compared to the national or international level, we see these areas to be far much detached from the center. So it's an area that I would want to take advantage of. The devolved system is still not so young. It's about 10 years now. We are going for the third term of the devolved government. And the elections happening this year, we'll have fresh governments coming in from September, and I would want to utilize that new energy to see what they can be able to do in that regard.
Great, thanks, Daniel. Thanks, Chloe. We do have time for another question. We got about 6 minutes left. Is there anybody else who's got a burning issue they'd like to raise with Daniel or something on their minds? Okay. Daniel, big thanks. I'm really glad we've heard more from you. It's always good. I think it's really hard, as we talked about before, we want to put in these fairly regular webinars. We'll probably do another one in May or June. I've got a few topics in mind. I'm not going to put anybody on the spot here, but I have a few thoughts about what the next webinar might look like. But it was great and really appreciate you taking the time to share with us your work. One piece of information which I don't think came up was the fact that, Daniel, as I understand it, you're in the midst of preparing a paper for submission to a journal. I had a thought that it might be helpful. There may be a couple of people on the call today that would be interested in taking a look at a draft and providing some insight from their perspectives. I mean, there's a lot of experience, notably from, as you mentioned already, from some of the folks working at ILRI who know perhaps the context where you're working, and so that I'm sure that many would be interested. And so do feel free to share that if you wish for comments. Yeah. And additional insight. And then, yeah, very much looking forward. I had some questions around the LITS and the implications of that. So looking forward to hearing more from you in perhaps 6 months, 8 months as this postdoc develops. Yeah, and I guess there's also a piece of follow-up. Deborah had mentioned Deborah and Rajashri, who are both online today, are helping to sort of frame some of the key messages emerging from the research. So definitely a follow-up conversation would be useful to identify what are the key messages at this point that we'd be comfortable sharing and how to do that, you know, through the website, through our Twitter feed, through because we are in about a half an hour going to be discussing our comm strategy for the year. So this, in a sense, your presentation is timely because we can integrate some thinking around that into the comm strategy. So yeah, big thanks, and thanks everybody for attending. Much appreciated, and look forward to seeing you all again soon.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thanks, Daniel. Bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
Daniel.